In 1184, some of the most powerful men in Europe walked into a royal meeting and ended up drowning in a toilet. They arrived in armor and fine robes, ready to argue about land, power, and honor. Minutes later, the floor beneath them collapsed, and dozens of nobles plunged into a hidden cesspit full of human waste. Some were crushed, some suffocated, some actually drowned in sewage. This is the day a royal council turned into one of the most humiliating disasters in medieval history, the Erfurt Latrine disaster. If you like dark, unbelievable stories that really happened, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In this video, we're stepping into the world of 12th century politics, walking through exactly what happened in that hall, and seeing how one rotten floor almost changed the future of Europe. Chapter 1. A Messy Empire. To understand why all these nobles were in the same room, we have to look at where and when this happened. It's the late 12th century. Central Europe is part of the Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, church lands, and free cities held together more by habit and politics than by a single, strong central state. On paper, there's a king, and eventually an emperor. In reality, dozens of local rulers are constantly fighting for more land, more privilege, and more influence. The city of Erfurt sits in what is now central Germany, on important trade routes that bring merchants money. Above the city is a fortified hill with churches, monasteries, and defensive walls. It's the perfect place for a king to host a big political meeting. Secure, impressive, and literally above everyone else. At this time, the king is Henry VI of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. He keeps his authority by traveling across his realm, holding royal gatherings called Hoftage, big meetings where nobles present disputes, swear loyalty, and try to win royal favor. When the king calls a Hoftag, you show up. Skip it, and you risk insulting the crown. Show up, and you might gain land, titles, or at least stay on the king's good side. That's why, in July 1184, a long list of lords, bishops, and knights all make their way to Erfurt. They're there because the king has summoned them, and because two powerful men can't stop fighting. Chapter 2. The feud that started it all. At the center of this meeting is a nasty conflict between two major players. On one side is Conrad, the Archbishop of Mainz, a leading church prince with serious political and spiritual power. On the other is Ludwig III, Landgrave of Thuringia, a high-ranking secular lord who controls key lands around Erfurt. Their argument is about land, authority, and prestige. It's part legal dispute, part ego, and part who actually runs this region. Each man has allies. Each believes he's in the right. As tempers rise, the feud threatens local peace. Armed followers, skirmishes, and rival claims make it dangerous for ordinary people and embarrassing for the crown. So Henry VI steps in. He orders both sides, and their supporters, to appear before him in Erfurt. He wants to hear the arguments and force a settlement under royal authority. For the nobles, this meeting is risky, but important. Lose, and you might give up land. Win, and the king backs your claim. No one traveling to Erfurt imagines that the real threat isn't swords or politics, but the building they're about to stand in. Chapter 3. The hall above the pit. The meeting takes place in a large hall in the fortified complex above Erfurt. Historians debate the exact room, but the basic setup is clear. Picture a long hall on an upper floor. Below it are lower levels, including storage areas and, crucially, a latrine pit, a cesspool where waste from the toilets collects. The nobles are standing on a wooden floor supported by beams that are old, weakened, and not designed for a packed room full of armored men. Medieval latrines were simple. A seat or a small room sat above a shaft, dropping waste into a pit or trench. These pits were cleaned infrequently. Over time, they filled with a thick, foul mix of sewage, and the damp gases and neglect could weaken nearby wood and supports. In this building, that cesspit sits directly under part of the hall. The only thing separating dozens of nobles from that pool of filth is an aging wooden floor and tired beams. Nobody is thinking about building safety. This is a royal event with the king present. If anything feels unsafe, people assume someone else has checked it already. They're wrong. Chapter 4. Too many nobles, not enough floor. On the morning of July 26, 1184, the nobles start filing into the hall. They climb the stairs in boots and spurs, mail shirts clinking with each step. Robes, cloaks, weapons, and helmets all add weight. Servants and scribes follow with scrolls, chests, and personal gear. Inside, voices bounce off the stone and timber. Old rivals eye each other across the room. Supporters of the archbishop and the landgrave cluster into little groups. Everyone is watching the king. Henry VI takes his place where he can see and be seen, likely near a wall or window close to something solid. Around him, the floor is packed with church officials, secular lords, and local elites. Now imagine all that weight, dozens of people, many of them in heavy armor and thick clothing, on a floor that is already old and weakened by time and moisture. Some accounts imply the floor may have creaked and sagged. Others make it sound like the collapse was sudden. Either way, no one reacts in time. What brings them here is a feud. What's about to kill many of them is gravity and bad maintenance, at the worst possible spot, right above the latrine. Chapter 5. When the floor disappears. At some point during the assembly, the floor finally gives out. First, a sharp crack. Beams snap. The boards under the densest part of the crowd drop away. In an instant, the center of the hall disappears. Nobles standing there don't have time to react. They're just gone, falling through splintering wood and broken supports. They crash down into the space below. Some smash into beams and timbers, breaking bones or losing consciousness. Others plunge straight into the cesspit, a deep pool of thick, choking waste. The room fills with screams and the sound of falling wood. People hit the surface of the pit and sink, dragged down by armor and soaked clothing. The liquid is too thick to swim in properly and too foul to breathe near. A few manage to grab fragments of wood or the edge of the pit. Others are buried by more bodies and debris dropping on top of them. Up above, the people near the edges stagger back, clutching at walls and pillars. They look down and see former allies and rivals flailing in filth. The smell is overwhelming. The shock is total. One person who does not fall is King Henry VI. According to later reports, he survives by clinging to an iron bar at a window or standing in a section of floor that holds. Either way, the king lives while many of his nobles die below him in the darkest possible way. When the chaos finally slows, dozens are dead, crushed, suffocated, or drowned in the cesspit beneath the hall. Chapter 6. Pulling bodies from a cesspit. The aftermath is grim. Servants, guards, and locals are called in to help. They bring ropes, ladders, and tools to pull aside broken wood and reach the pit. Anyone still alive has to be hauled out through thick sludge that clings to clothing and armor. The air is heavy with toxic gas from the cesspool. Rescuers risk getting sick or passing out just by being near it. But there's no choice. People are missing, and families will want answers and bodies. By the end, the scale of the disaster is clear. Different sources give different numbers, But many say around 60 nobles die that day, with some estimates even higher. That's an enormous loss in a medieval society, especially because they're not random peasants. They're high-status figures. Word travels fast. The story of nobles dying in a latrine spreads across the region. For grieving families, it's a nightmare. For gossip, it's explosive. The king survives along with some key power players, but a chunk of the noble class in that area has just been wiped out in a single, ridiculous, tragic accident. Chapter 7. From Disaster to Legend. Over time, the Erfurt Latrine disaster turns from a fresh tragedy into a story people keep telling. And every time it's retold, the details get a little bigger, a little nastier, and a little more symbolic. Chroniclers emphasize the humiliation. Proud nobles, decked out in armor and silk, dying in a cesspool. Some writers frame it as a sign from God, a divine punishment for pride, sin, or corruption. As the centuries pass, accounts shift. Some move the exact location. Some change the number of dead. Some make the cesspit sound like a vast underground lake of sewage. Modern historians, looking back, try to strip away the embellishments. They agree that a deadly floor collapse happened in Erfurt in 1184, during a royal assembly. They agree that many nobles died and that a latrine or cesspit was involved. What they debate are the specifics. Exactly how big was the pit? How many people fell into it compared to those killed by beams and debris? How much of the drowning in excrement image is literal, and how much is storytelling? We may never get exact numbers, but the core is real enough. A structural failure turned a political meeting into a horror show. The reason the story survived is simple. It's unforgettable. You don't easily forget the image of an entire room of nobles plunging into a latrine. Chapter 8. What this says about medieval life. The Erfurt disaster is wild, but it quietly reveals a lot about the Middle Ages. First, infrastructure was fragile. Buildings were patched, expanded, and reused over decades or centuries. Hidden rot, overloaded floors, and poor maintenance could turn any crowded space into a deadly trap. Second, politics was intensely physical. When the king called, people showed up in person, in armor, often carrying weapons. They had to be in the room, and that room wasn't always ready for them. Third, status didn't shield anyone from ugly deaths. You could be a count, a bishop, or a famous knight. But one bad beam was enough to take you from the throne room to the cesspit in seconds. Finally, the way people told the story shows how they viewed fate and justice. Many saw the accident as more than bad luck. They saw meaning in it, a warning about pride and the limits of power. In other words, this isn't just a gross story. It's a snapshot of a world where buildings, politics, and beliefs all collided in one awful moment. Chapter 9. The Day the Floor Gave Up. In the grand timeline of history, the Erfurt Latrine disaster didn't start a war or topple a dynasty. But it has survived in memory for more than 800 years because the way it happened is impossible to forget. It's a reminder that history isn't just heroic speeches and glorious battles. Sometimes it's bad construction, ignored warning signs, and a meeting room built over a giant toilet. On that day in 1184, some of the most powerful men in the Holy Roman Empire came together to settle a feud. Instead, they discovered the real danger was right under their feet. One rotten floor, one hidden cesspit, and a royal council that ended in one of the grossest accidents in medieval history. If you want more weird, true stories that sound fake but aren't, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which disaster, mystery, or strange event you want to see next. And next time someone says a meeting went down the drain, remember there was once a day in Erfurt when that really, literally happened.